Good afternoon and welcome to CRC's webinar on Authentic Public Engagement. This webinar is organized by the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative, or CRC, in partnership with the Institute for Local Government, or ILG. My name is Grace Kaufman. I'm a project manager at the Local Government Commission, and I serve as support for CRC, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. A quick overview of today's agenda. I will first provide a brief intro into CRC for those of you who may not be familiar with us. Then Crystal Love-Lazard from ILG will provide an overview of what authentic public participation is and why it matters. After, Grace Person from LGC will provide an overview of public participation in action. Before we get started, I have a few logistical items to go over. Everyone will be muted except for our panelists, and due to the large number of participants, we ask that you type your question into the question box. Please feel free to submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and I will summarize those questions during the Q&A portion, which will follow Grace Person's presentation. If we don't get to all of the questions, we'll ask our presenters to respond after the webinar, and we will share their responses in a follow-up email along with additional resources. This webinar will also be recorded and made available on our website along with the PowerPoint presentations. And as I mentioned, this webinar is being organized by the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative. CRC is a collaborative of local leaders seeking to build climate resilience throughout California's capital region. We bring together stakeholders from across sectors and jurisdictions to find regional solutions to address our shared challenges, including drought, extreme heat, extreme weather events, wildfires, flooding, and more. Our goal is to help the 6 counties of El Dorado, Placer, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba, and the communities they encompass thrive in the face of a changing climate. And the Local Government Commission serves as the program administrator for CRC. If you have any questions or you're interested in joining CRC, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And that is our growing membership. All right, so our first presenter, Crystal Love-Lazard, is an environmental policy specialist with expertise in collaborative problem solving and conflict resolution. Her career has a special focus on natural resources and local governance. She has extensive background in public involvement and facilitation focused on census-based multi-stakeholder processes. She creates facilitation approaches using a blend of techniques that ensure high-quality feedback is gathered and that a variety of voices and viewpoints are heard. Crystal is often utilizing her census-building skills with local governments, state governments, and nonprofit organizations. Prior to joining ILG in May 2011, Crystal worked at the Center for Collaborative Policy at California State University, Sacramento, and Environmental Science Associates. She has a unique perspective on air quality, sustainability, climate change, adaptation, and the intersectionality of those topics with authentic public engagement. She earned her MPA with a natural resource management emphasis from San Francisco State University and her BS in environmental policy analysis and planning from UC Davis. Grace Person joined the ILG team in February 2019 as a community design project manager. She has a diverse background in public policy facilitation, project management, and nonprofit experience, and for the past 6 years, Grace's work included public engagement, process design, small and large group facilitation, and stakeholder outreach on a range of public policy issues. Prior to joining LGC, Grace worked with federal, state, and local government agencies and nonprofit clients to engage a range of stakeholders around issues such as water policy, emergency response planning, disabilities, communities, access and functional needs, and organizational strategic planning. Her interest in public policy issues began when she was a Colorado College Public Interest Fellow assisting the Pikes Peak Community Foundation to provide grants to local community organizations to address a variety of pressing social and environmental community issues. Since then, she has worked for the Vermont State Legislature, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and the Consensus and Collaboration Program within Sacramento State College of Continuing Education. And a quick reminder to all participants to please type your question into the control panel at any point during the presentation. And Crystal, you're up.
Thanks, Grace. So, well, thanks for that warm welcome. If you don't know, ILG is the nonprofit training and education affiliate of the California State Association of Counties, the League of California Cities, and the California Special Districts Association. So what we really do is focus on good governance at the local level. ILG does this working through 4 different program areas. We have a focus on leadership and governance, sustainable communities, public engagement, and youth and civics education. Through those 4 program areas, we do a variety of services, including education and training, technical assistance, capacity building, and convening. Our public engagement program has been around for about 20 years, and I just want to walk you through some of the where it's been, and then we'll go to where it's going. So, what we mean when we say public engagement. There's a lot of different definitions for that, but what ILG means is a broad range of methods used to help members of the public become more informed and or influence public decisions. So why would you do this? The benefits of engaging your community can be seen in a myriad of ways. So anywhere from better identification of the public's values, ideas, and recommendations, creating and fostering relationships and having more informed residents about the issues that are facing your local communities, improved local agency decision-making and actions with better impacts and outcomes, more community buy-in and support with less contentiousness and litigation, and faster project implementation with less need to revisit the plan later. And really, this is my favorite, building more trust. Trust within each other, trust between your community and the local government itself. So how would you engage? How do you do engagement? So this field, when we talk about it, we use this IAP2 public participation spectrum to explain the variety of different ways that you can engage your community. So it ranges from somewhere as simple as inform and as complex as empower. And as you move across from inform into empower is where you really increase the impact that the public is having on the outcome or the decision. And what we'd like to stress is that you don't have to just stay in one of these categories. You can create a public participation plan or approach that really uses a collection of these different methods as it best fits the needs of what you're trying to do. So this spectrum is not ours. Again, it comes from IAP2. And so they developed this as a way to sort of show the impact of the decision that the public has through a different series of activities. So with Inform, which is something that we see almost every local agency does, Inform, where really the goal is to keep the public informed of what is happening. That can be seen, like an example of that is seen through a city website page that talks about climate action planning efforts, a fact sheet mailing to your neighborhood residents about a planned climate-related project, an open house presentation by a city department to a community group about climate action planning. Really, Inform is the sort of one-directional, we give you this information now that now you know. Consult, as we move to the more increasing level of public impact, the next category is consult. And the promise really is that we'll keep you informed, we're going to listen and acknowledge your concerns and aspirations and provide feedback on how that input has influenced the decision. And so this category, you really see activities like community forums, surveys, focus groups, a typical city council hearing, we consider consultation, and a public meeting asking for individual opinions and recommendations about climate action planning processes. As we continue to move along the spectrum, we see Involve. And Evolve, the promise is to work directly with the community throughout the climate action planning process to ensure that the public concerns and aspirations are consistently understood and considered. And an example of Involve would be workshops that include the community in all stages of a plan development to ensure that their concerns and aspirations are understood and considered. Like deliberative polling is an example of Involve. As we keep moving along the spectrum, we see Collaborate. The goal of collaboration is to partner with the public in each aspect of the planning process, including the development of alternatives or the identification of a preferred solution. And this is where we really see the gold star of a lot of local agencies working with their community members at this level. And examples of techniques at the Collaborate section would be a citizen advisory committee, participatory decision-making, community conversations where participants discuss community priorities and confront real trade-offs and craft their collective recommendations, and a representative group of residents who draw on community input and suggest different planning ideas. Empower is the last and most public impactful category, And the goal of this is to place the final decision-making in the hands of the public. So many of you are local agency representatives, and you understand how unusual that may be or how scary that may seem. But we do see it in some instances where you really want to maximize the community ownership of an effort and really exchange knowledge and capacity building. So examples of that would be citizen juries and then delegated decision-making to that community group. So that's the spectrum of when we say public engagement, what we mean. It could be actions literally within any of these 5 categories. So we've been in this field for a while, and we've been sort of surveying and talking to locals. Again, we serve 3 major parent organizations that represent thousands of local agency associations, or local agencies. And we hear a lot of the same challenges represented when we talk to folks. So the number one thing we hear is that it's always the same people who participate. Almost every agency has what we like to call the usual suspects, or the same 10 people who show up. And that obviously doesn't represent the entirety of the community, and that can present a challenge. Lack of staff and or financial resources. There's never enough people or never enough time, and often these public engagement processes take both in time and money. So those who participate are political extremes compared to the community as a whole. That's something that should resonate with most of you, that the folks that do take the time to show up to that hearing or that community meeting are not necessarily the general public. They're the very emotionally involved and dedicated and empowered individual who has a very specific point of view, but they may not represent everybody. Residents who aren't adequately informed about issues is a common challenge, especially when we talk about climate action planning or anything to do with environmental land use. There's a technical aspect to that not all residents are fully aware of, and then it makes it challenging to engage them because you have different people with different levels of information or expertise. Lack of time. So some of these processes that I talked about in the last slide with the spectrum do take time, and oftentimes the world is what it is, and you don't necessarily have the time you would love to have to do a real robust or authentic engagement process. Lack of procedures for assessing and learning from PE experiences. This is a common one, especially when we talk to people who are engineers who like evaluation and they like data, and public engagement can be more of an art than a science. So as we move through this presentation, I'll be showing you resources where we've developed ways to do this evaluation, and then other organizations that have that as well. And lack of knowledge on best practices. Even though this field has been around for quite a while, it's still emerging, and not all jurisdictions are aware of what would be considered a best practice for community engagement. So we do these surveys periodically, and this is just one that I thought was particularly interesting, that 66% of local officials named a group of residents that they have found especially difficult to engage in the public decision-making process. So this list is not going to surprise any of you, I'm sure, that these are the difficult and hard to reach folks. These folks are busy and or have other barriers that make it difficult for them to engage. But without engaging them in some way, it's hard to say that you have authentically heard from your entire community in regards to whatever it is that you are trying to do. So what have we done? So a couple of years ago, the Institute for Local Government created something that's called TIERS. And TIERS stands for Think, Initiate, Engage, Review, and Shift. And this is a framework that we've created that can be adapted to any sort of local government issue, but it does work particularly well around land use, housing, climate, transportation-related planning efforts. And so this stands, it's a sort of a systematic framework where you walk through step by step, and in some cases there are questions that prompt you to consider certain things, and then there's templates and other pieces as well. So the first pillar, and the way we would always recommend local agencies start, is to think. Think about what you're trying to do. And so the first step is a self-assessment. And whether this is a quick assessment of just a few hours, or you do a deeper assessment where you interview the people in this space and you talk to what's happened around this issue in the past, but do some kind of assessment where you understand kind of how are we doing, where are we at. And then the second step, step 2 of think, is to consider your public engagement approach. And this is before you write anything down, but you really think about your public agency's policies and practices, including your current staffing needs. Conduct an analysis of the public engagement functions and needs across your agency. Kind of consider what resources you have and what you would need. And step 3 is this: contemplate your community landscape. And what we mean by that is to create or update a list of local community-based organizations and others that would help inform your outreach efforts, and identify diverse locations to hold meetings with targeted audiences in mind. And this is that like Rolodex that you would create one for like any effort and then tailor it based on the needs of your effort, depending on what it is you're trying to do, what geographic region, or who you're really trying to reach. But that's the think. And so we really stress that a lot of the time needs to be spent on this think pillar before you're actually doing anything. But think about this, because the more intentional you can be as you set up your plan, the more likely that you're going to reach your intended goal and outcome. Okay, so the next pillar is initiate. Keep going. Oh, sorry, that was think. Initiate. So the next pillar is initiate. This is where you start to draft your public engagement approach. I highly recommend you choose a mix of in-person and online activities, and that this is the point where you really consider what is your timeline for this project. What is your budget? What is your budget? What staff time implications for your department or other departments do you need to consider? Who will facilitate the events? How will the data be analyzed and gathered and summarized? And then also you begin to think, what could go wrong? How might your approach help mitigate for the challenges that you could see coming based on what you found out when you did your self-assessment, like where were you in the past? And then step 2 is to develop an outreach plan. So you start to create an outreach plan. Consider what you know from your community landscape listing. Ask yourself questions about who are you trying to reach, how much time is available, how much money is available, and really pick an approach. If you go back to that IAP2 spectrum, really pick an approach that fits that answers the question, that fits the question to that answer. So there's not one right way to do this, but think about what it is you're trying to do and what different public engagement technique is the best way to get there. So those are those questions. And then step 3 is this reality check. Are there local, state, or federal laws or regulations that you need to consider? They are constantly changing. So what is new in this field? What do you need to know? Are there any internal organizational politics or challenges that you need to take into consideration? Are there larger, what we call big P, political issues to keep in mind? So there's a big political laws or policies that are, happening. Is there an upcoming election, for example, that might significantly impact what you're trying to do? So this is all of the initiate phase where you start. And then when you get to the next phase, which is engage, this is where you're really doing. This is where you implement your plan. So step 1 is you implement your outreach plan. You prioritize your outreach measures. You ensure that your targeted audiences are represented authentically within your plan. It's a good idea to double check with local leaders to ensure that all those authentic voices are reached. And we can talk a little bit later about strategies on how you do that. And this is step 2 is really to implement your approach. This is you execute your plan. Ensure that all your roles are clear and adjust as appropriate. And step 3, this reality check. We have these reality checks because we know that things aren't linear, right? Things shift. So are there any internal organizational politics or challenges that have changed that need to be considered? Has anything happened since you started this work that you now need to adjust based on? Check in with key community leaders on a regular basis to understand new or upcoming issues and mitigate accordingly. This is where you sort of, adjust as needed, but keep moving. And then the 4th pillar is review. And this is something that we highly recommend, and we understand that many agencies have very little time to do this. This is like the evaluation piece at the end, where step 1, you evaluate your public engagement approach. What worked? What could have gone better? We have resources on our website. There's one, for example, called a rapid review worksheet that helps you walk through those questions and gather that data. Ask yourself, is there training needed for any staffers in order to execute a more effective public engagement process in the future? For example, are there facilitation trainings or graphic design trainings, or even constructing a survey question that if you build those skills internally, you could avoid some of the mishaps or amplify the successes in the next time you do this. Evaluate your outreach plan. This is where you ask what has worked, what could have gone better itself. And then again, is there training that needs to be done to help deepen the success next time? Step 3, what barriers did you overcome? What internal organizational barriers did you overcome when you worked through this process? Are there political barriers that you overcame? Are there barriers you didn't overcome that you want to try to overcome by doing the approach differently next time? This is sort of that review evaluation piece. And the final part of this pillar is step 5, shift. So we see shift happening potentially in 3 areas. There can be shifts by using tiers and doing a more authentic, intentional public engagement process, we sometimes see shift in the internal organization, both the development of, for example, like if public engagement is assigned within a certain job designation and that person is given space to really do that and do that well. If organizations commit to training their elected officials and staff in public engagement policy or skill building, developing ongoing communication strategies that go beyond traditional methods into, using different ethnic media, for example, and then basically asking for help or getting sort of that extra training within your organization. There are shifts. By doing authentic public engagement, you can see shifts within your community as well. And this gets to my favorite of the public engagement benefits, which is that trust building. Did you, by doing a really authentic, robust process, did you see shifts within your community around trust? Are there beneficial shifts in just the relationship that your staff is having with different community-based organizations? You can, for example, set and track metrics related to in-person and phone meetings with diverse and underrepresented community members, and choose these goals and see if you meet them. Look at sort of shifting that. And then, of course, there's always a policy change shift. You can look and see whether doing this authentic public engagement process has changed any of the ways that you have public engagement policies within your organization. And we see this all over as we slowly move through this process with different jurisdictions through these trainings. But my favorite one is locally, Yolo County has a sort of public engagement guidelines that they've created based on tiers where they are very authentic and now have multiple people within the county that know how to do this and collaboratively work together on initiatives and do sort of that cross-dissemination and training. So that's the shift piece of what we see. Within these pillars, we have a series of templates, and these templates are sort of ways to help guide you. It's a series of questions or a series of forms to fill out or just prompts that will help you walk through these 5 pillars. And so the Tiers framework has 5 templates: an assessment, community landscape, meeting logistics, outreach, and facilitation, and they all have a look kind of like this. So when you go on ILG's website under tiers, you'll see links to all the different templates and all the different pillars and the pieces. And so here is the link to where you can find all of these resources. The tiers framework is only about 3 or 4 years old, but it was built upon a lot of existing resources that ILG has created over the last 15 to 20 years around public engagement. So you'll see both things if you go to ILG's website, both the sort of like foundational pieces on public engagement and best practices and tips, and then the tiers framework templates and sort of instructions. And everything is free to use, and if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out at any time. And the last thing I just want to note is we do trainings around the state around tiers, where we work with jurisdictions over a 2-day period to really take one of their cases and walk them through and create a public engagement approach with them using the framework. And our next workshop is September 5th and 6th in San Diego. Registration is closing soon, but there might be space for one more team. So if you do want to come, please reach out as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thanks, Crystal. This is Grace Person. I am with the Local Government Commission, and thank you for the introduction, Grace, earlier. I just want to give a brief overview of what LGC is and just give a little highlight of where we're going. So LGC is the local government commission. We connect leaders, advance policy, implement solutions to help create livable, healthy, resource-efficient communities. We have several program areas, and we are known for doing workshops and trainings and forums, presentation, design charrettes, community image surveys, and policy development assistance. Like I said, I'm with the community design team at LGC, and we work with local communities to plan, design, and develop changes in their built environment. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the value of public participation in planning. As Crystal mentioned, there's real benefits to public participation. And for us, what we see is that we get better plans. Hearing from a variety of community needs and wants and possible solutions to new or chronic issues means that we get more options to create solutions to problems that actually work for people. We're engaging people in their community. People's time and energy are investments, and spending time and energy working on community issues help people feel like they can make the community feel the way they want to and help others make the community feel the way that benefits them. We want to give people a sense of ownership of the plan. Their input means that they're expressing their needs and wants, and that decision makers have a chance to hear about and approve the options and plans that actually seek to address a variety of needs. And community members understand that, and they feel a sense of ownership when they are participating in that way. Good plans survive political changes. Community buy-in means that a plan with a community support is less likely to sit on a shelf and be forgotten. So Crystal did a great job of walking us through the IAP2 public participation spectrum. I'm not going to say much more about that other than to say that another way to think about it too is the inform end of the spectrum is more informal, and the empower end of the spectrum can actually be more formal. And so just also think about it in terms of what are you trying to do? Are you trying to give people information, or are you really trying to have an engaged decision-making process? So the different types of engagement that the community design team uses for our planning process is several. We use in the room, in the field, and online. So in the room, we have advisory groups and committees. We do workshops and community meetings, focus groups and listening sessions. In the field, we do walk and bike assessments. We do temporary installations and pop-up tables. And then online, we've held digital workshops, meetings, and town halls, and then also have done questionnaires and polling. Really, what we're trying to do is asking people to join us and to meet them where they are, to be out in the field to talk about things, or if they're online, we want to meet them online as well. So we use a variety of engagement styles. So the advisory group committee is particularly important to us because at the beginning of a project, it's good to form an advisory group or committee of key stakeholders to really guide the project's overall engagement strategy and to help design public engagement events. This group is key stakeholders that represent different backgrounds, different groups in the community, and they can also be key in outreach, in doing outreach. Having an advisory group or committee also helps elevate and makes others aware of particular current concerns, interests, or needs early on in the engagement process. Just a note about our particular process, we oftentimes are working with a local government who has hired plan writers and other design consultants for a project. So as a project team, we work regularly with the advisory group to get input and feedback on existing conditions, and then later on drafts on the plan. So typically we could have an outreach advisory group and then a technical advisory group that we are consulting with about particular options or issues or things that we need to be aware of as we're doing our planning process. So we tend to use a process called Charrette, and within the Charrette, there's several things. Like I mentioned, workshops, focus groups, listening sessions, walk audits or bike audits or assessments, and then online forums. The workshop piece really is important because it's the kickoff of our project. It's a chance for the community to learn about the project we want to make it festive. We want to have food. We want it to be convenient. We want to have a convenient time and location. We want to have great speakers, and we want to provide for the needs of the community to be able to participate. And that would include daycare, translation services, and it's entertaining. So once we have people at an in-person event, we really want to make it interactive. So we use community meetings as a chance to do that. Some of the activities that we do include visioning sessions or value statements where we ask people to think of what they would like their community to look like in 20, 30 years, or what are key things that they're concerned about or interested in. And then collectively either post it up on a wall somewhere and group shared interests or shared visions, or to have a couple people, while the rest are still reflecting on what they think could be the future of their community, to actually share that out loud with people. We also do tabletop mapping. And what that is it's very participatory, and it allows people to work together in small groups around an aerial map or on an online map. And it's getting people to work together, to listen to their neighbors and their colleagues, to identify problems to address, to get their ideas down on paper, and to arrive at consensus on things. It also is a great way for us to develop recommendations and potential solutions to these items that they see as concerns or problematic. Focus groups and listening sessions are some of the ways that we create more, we use as a smaller space as a way to create candid conversations, and is really helpful for us to hear from people specifically on something and to have more time on an issue. One example of how we meet people where they are is when we do a Safe Routes to School planning effort, we'll arrange to spend time with a high school or elementary class in the community on that route to school, or the school that's part of that planning process, to get input on what they want to see as a safe route, or what their issues are when they're trying to get to school. So this is just an example of how do you meet people where they are. So like I mentioned before, in the field, it's a great chance for people to experience the same environment and to share their perspective on that, and that generates shared understanding of what the issues are, what the different mobility needs and modes are, and it allows people to work together. It creates a camaraderie, a sense of like, oh, you see it this way, I see it this way, or a different way, and then everyone's starting to have a conversation. Field trips are great. They're really energizing. So these are just a couple examples of pictures of when we've done walk audits. We'll get people to wear vests, so it's a clear sense of, this is something we're doing as a group. It can, I want to go back for a second. Walk and bike audits can be done as part of an opening of a workshop or the opening of a charrette, or they can be done as separate activities, as a separate public engagement effort. It doesn't have to be baked in to a process. So temporary installations are really fun because you get to try out a change to your environment. And these two examples are really interesting. The one on the right is actually an installation, a trial roundabout installation in Richmond, and the community was really intrigued by how it could work and how it looked, and they're really excited about it. And then the one on the left is like, what does a crosswalk look like on a busy street in front of a school that may not have had a crosswalk in the past? Again, it's really an opportunity for the community to try a temporary change, to try the change suggested for their environment and to see how people interact with it. So our planning team or our project team can actually, will sometimes put up tables on the sidewalks and actually watch how people are interacting, or parents can come by and ask, like, what is this and what is this for, and is this going to be permanent? So there's a lot of interaction opportunity around these temporary installations. So I mentioned online meetings or online workshops. These really is an opportunity for people who may not always be able to attend in person for a variety of reasons. You can meet people where they are online. It's a similar format where you're having a welcome, you have a discussion about the vision and values, you can discover and explore the particular issues of geography, you can poll and solicit comment, you can share results of that information. And then the project page can also, these digital workshops, meetings, and town halls can also allow for participants to follow the project, to look at alternatives that are being proposed, to see the draft plan, to add comments there, and to also look at the final report. Here's a list of other online participation tools that exist. Definitely check them out, see which one might work for your particular project. They each have unique features and benefits, and so it's worth exploring what those online pieces are, but this is supplemental to any public engagement effort that you do in person for a specific geographic location. We have done questionnaires and polling, and again, this is one specific activity that we use to get input. There are a variety of others that can be used as well. Questionnaires and polling is very tailored around particular issues and does take a bit of time and investment to craft the questions to get input. But it's worthwhile to do, is what I'm trying to say. So for outreach and publicity, participation and engagement is only as good as your outreach. So it's important to identify the ways that people get their information. What news or social media outlets are they using, and what networks do they belong to? Something to consider, the advisory group can really help with outreach, but make sure that you're also sending out information in other ways. And part of that we found and have been really successful with is partnering with a community-based organization. Such groups like advocacy groups, service organizations and providers, faith-based groups, and civic associations that really have a connection to their community are great ways to learn about their community's interests and issues, and to also help share the word about what you're trying to do, about the planning process, about the planning project. These pictures I wanted to highlight are from the Fresno Southern Blackstone Avenue Smart Mobility Plan project, where we partnered with the Fresno Metro Ministry to do outreach, and the turnout at the workshops and focus groups were great. Another example, not shown here, but another example is from the Guadalupe Complete Streets project. We partnered with a local veterans group and the Dunn Center. These groups helped us, or did canvassing for us and flyering, and because they did the outreach and they are trusted groups within the community for upcoming events, people showed up. They were invested in showing up. Something to note when you do ask a CBO or a nonprofit in the community to help you with outreach is that, and these groups, if they're in the equity and environmental justice space, LGC in particular, but it's a good thing to consider, we are sensitive to asking people to volunteer. We work to find ways to partner with these groups so that they can be compensated for their time and energy, time and costs. It's not fair to a CBO to do this outreach list to help us with that and not be compensated for their time and energy. So please be mindful of that. Another thing to consider, and this is really a best practice and very, very important, is that when LGC is communicating with people, we seek to do so in their language. So we get translators, we get sign language interpreters, and we seek to provide materials in different languages, including Braille. We want people to understand the project and to feel welcome to participate, and one of the ways to do that is to speak their language and to show them that we understand their need. We also make sure that we have project sites, either hosted on our page or on the city's page, People use online resources to learn about things. That's where they go. It's available 24/7. And as that's the case, we want to make sure that those resources and information is available to them. So I just want to take a quick moment to walk through the next couple of slides to show you what a process could actually look like, and then we'll transition into question and answer. So for the Charrette process, we have, like I said, it's typically a 2 to 5 day condensed period of time where we'll do preparatory planning, we'll convene an advisory group, and then the Charrette process itself is an opening workshop or town hall. We'll do focus groups and listening sessions the next day. We'll do walking and bike audits throughout the course of the day, or course of the week. And then as we've heard the input and the designers have been synthesizing this input and feedback, we'll have a closing presentation of the concept so people can see how their input has been received, how it has influenced and the suggestions for the plan, how it's been translated, and what it all rolls into. Some Charrette processes, you'll have a plan at the end of the week. Others, it's just a collection of concepts that then get rolled up into an additional planning process that gets then baked into a formal plan. So this slide is really about looking at a planning process that may not necessarily be tied to a specific street change or a Charrette process. So if you're looking to do a policy or plan development effort, so say a climate change mitigation plan or an emergency response plan, really you can take any one of these activities and create opportunities for multiple contact with the public, with your stakeholders, so that way they have a sense that you are coming back to them for input and being transparent in where you are in the process, what you are doing with their input, and how their input is really influencing the outcome, the product. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Grace Kay to facilitate our question session with you all.
Great. Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Crystal, for the wonderful presentation. We do have a couple questions here, and I encourage folks to, again, go to the chat box or the Q&A box and go ahead and put a question in if you had it, and we'll go ahead and try and get to that in the next 15 or so. So for you, Crystal, and actually this is for you too, Grace, what is the best way to reach the general public? And specifically for you, Crystal, when you're in the think stage and you're unfamiliar with the area, how do you start finding out what CBOs to engage with? And what if those community organizations can't be found easily by a local government or project partner, meaning there's no website or formal office?
Okay. So there's a couple ways. There's a couple questions in there. But how do you find CBOs if they're hard to find? One of my favorite things to do when you start these processes is just look at who's in that space and who's impacted by the decision that you're likely going to be implementing, and then think creatively about going out to those groups and starting having dialogue. One thing that I always recommend is if you have an effort that you know is going to impact a certain portion of your community, but you don't even know who necessarily are who the community-based organizations are that serve that community, I would go to something, if a neighborhood or a community group or a function or whatever it is, like a cultural fair or a farmer's market or whatever, to start going to them and start talking to them, setting up coffee meetings or having dialogue where you ask them to help you understand who are the trusted leaders in that space, and then who do those leaders go to for information, and where are those groups. And churches are always really good places, schools are good places, activity groups are good places. Just don't be shy. I think oftentimes local agencies get a little paralyzed by that. I don't know who, so I won't talk to anyone because I might talk to someone wrong. Just start talking to them. and I swear, I promise you, things will emerge. Somebody will bubble up. And for good and for bad, you're going to find the people that are really love what you're going to do and will get behind and be supporters and champions, and you're going to find people who are really frustrated by what you might want to do, and they are going to be frustrated and kind of express that, but it's early. It's better to hear those frustrations earlier in the process than when you're, at a hearing making a final decision on a plan. It's like try to, go upstream of that and then just start having that dialogue.
And one of the ways to frame that question, that when you're having those coffee meetings or you're just chatting with someone at the farmers market organizing booth, is to just say, who else might be interested in this project? Who else might want to know about this? And just take down that information. It's okay to not know everyone who could be participating or should be participating. The goal is to get as many people as you possibly can at the outset, and then create as many opportunities as you can for them to engage in the process during the process. Like I said, one of the tools that we do is we have pop-up tables. So we are going to the places, we are in the space where people are, and that allows us to engage with them in their daily life. So we don't always see everyone, but we somehow manage to come across more than we think we would.
Great, thank you both. And this is also directed towards you both. How do you craft meaningful public engagement for grant-funded projects with really compressed timeframes per the terms of the budget, per the terms of the grant?
So getting back to that IAP2 spectrum, public engagement can look like any of those 5 categories. If you have a very compressed timeline, then do what makes sense for that timeline with that goal. The only thing I would strongly urge you not to do is promise more than you can do. So don't lead people to believe that they will have the ability to make a decision or recommendations if you don't have the time that would be required to walk through that kind of a process. If you have a compressed time frame or very limited bookends, then it might be something more on the inform or consulting them with very discrete questions and then moving forward.
And also be transparent with your process, frankly. Like, don't be afraid to tell people, this is what we can do with the time that we have. And, like Crystal said, don't overpromise, but be transparent with them about what it is that you are able to do, and let them know where they are in that process, why you are going through this process, and what you're able to do with it.
Great. Thank you. And so are there any tried and tested questions that are helpful for opening up at public workshops or focus group dialogues and kind of break the ice?
So like I mentioned in our opening workshops for Charrette, because we're helping a community think about physical space, we tend to ask them that question of, what do you want your community to look like in 20, 30 years? And we leave it at that because we want to hear the variety of things. Icebreakers are really about a way for people to feel comfortable to share, but it's also an opportunity for you to start getting them to think about what are the possibilities of things. So really, if you're doing a planning effort for a geographic location, anything about the future is really helpful, or helping them think about transportation modes that they enjoy partaking in. Those are good things to do. If you're in a planning process related to a coordination effort, or so like the climate change mitigation planning or hazard mitigation planning, really just asking people to think about the future is a good way. I don't have some specific language around that right now, but that would be my suggestion of questions to use.
Great. This question gets asked a lot, and I'm hoping you two can tackle it to the best of your ability. Have you run into outreach fatigue from communities that have multiple agencies or organizations reaching out to them? If so, how have you dealt with this? And then I'd also add the communities that aren't necessarily designated as severely disadvantaged, but are still vulnerable to climate impacts. How do you ensure that those communities are also included?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll start, but I know Grace will add. So outreach fatigue is real, and we are definitely seeing this now with all of the different cap and trade programs and all the different capacity building programs that we're working with and others are working with around the state. So there's a couple things with this. I would suggest, echoing on what Grace said earlier about if you can give them something, if it's a monetary stipend, if you can feed them, if you can give them something that feeds back into them, then it helps. But tried and true from a public engagement practitioner perspective, I think you really have to show them what the impact of their engagement and time is. So if they come up to a meeting, if they come to a community meeting and they say a bunch of stuff, and then you go away and they go away and they never hear about it again, they're more likely to feel that fatigue than if you circle back to them and you explain to them how their input was used and you show the impact of their participation. That can have more of an empowering outcome than a fatigue kind of outcome. And I know it takes more time, and we understand that. So being intentional about when you do that and really building that step into your public engagement approach is a great idea. If you don't have time for that, then be careful how much you ask of them. If you engage a little bit more on the inform and consult and do things like via a survey that aren't as much of a lift for community members and therefore less likely to really create that fatigue that you've overtapped me and now I'm done.
I think the thing to think about too is who else is working in the space at your level that you can partner with. So like here in California, we have, as many of you know, CARB doing things, and the water agencies doing things, and the Health and Human Services agencies doing things. So where you can, understand what else is being asked of these communities to provide input on, and see if you can partner or join in on some of those meetings or workshops or efforts, because then they're not being tapped multiple times by different people for the same information. So be mindful of that there are other entities, other agencies that you could partner with to piggyback in on some of this information. I know you might have different requests or different engagement practices, but think about those opportunities and see what you can leverage. Grace, you talked about, or you said that there was a question about disadvantaged communities on the edges. Can you re-ask that question?
Yeah, so if there's, a lot of these communities that, are experiencing outreach fatigue or because they are identified by CalEnviroScreen as, severely disadvantaged, and some of the grants require, outreach to only severely disadvantaged groups. So just wondering, those other communities that aren't, listed as severely disadvantaged but are still very vulnerable and under-resourced, how do you ensure that those communities are included, or is there any way to include those communities while you're engaging the communities nearby that are also severely disadvantaged?
Very interesting question. It really depends on the nature of the project, because so there's a project that LGC Community Design Team is working on right now that is specifically for disadvantaged communities, but there are communities on the fringe that could benefit from this. So while we're not necessarily directly engaging those fringe communities, we're aware of that. And my point is that it depends on the project, right? So what is the nature of your work? What's the goal of the project? What is the desired outcome? And is there a way to kind of expand it just a little bit to include those groups? If the target audience is not necessarily the extremely disadvantaged communities, then make it as big as possible. But if it really is those vulnerable communities, the most vulnerable communities, then take the lessons learned from that outreach and apply it to that broader conversation once those opportunities are presented, or once those opportunities come forward.
Great, thank you for that. And we had a question in regards to Crystal's engagement survey, if there's a link to this somewhere, and yes, there is, and it'll be included in the follow-up materials. Grace, I do have a question for you, and Crystal, you can answer this as well. As far as types of engagement, you had listed room, field, online. How do you decide what engagement style to use? And have you found that, one, you get more interaction, or are they equally effective?
So again, this comes for me when I'm planning a process, or we're it depends on the nature of the project. So for us, because we do so much work in the built environment, we like this mixture of in the room and out in the environment and online, because it gives multiple opportunities, multiple experiences for participants. If I'm doing something that's more of a specific plan and a specific type of plan, because there are specific plans for communities, a specific type of plan between state agencies and how they're going to coordinate, that tends to lean more towards, meeting in meeting spaces like conference rooms and meeting halls. I've also seen field trips done for forest planning and restorative forest planning efforts, and those field trips are phenomenal experiences for the participants and for us as planners, or facilitators, So it really, I just encourage you to think about the participant experience and the overall goal of what you're trying to accomplish. If you, have a document that you're creating at the end of the day, what are the participants used to and what's comfortable for them? If you need to have people engage in a particular issue at a street corner or at a town center, having them out there looking at the curbs and the intersections together collectively really changes the experience from people than just talking about it in a room. You're seeing it all together. You're talking about it all together.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm cognizant of the fact that it's 2, and one of the best practices is always to end things on time. But I just wanted to add my 2 seconds on that is you ask yourself, what is the goal? And you pick a participation strategy, an engagement strategy that helps you achieve that goal. There are no one best way or right way or wrong way to do this, but identify and be honest about your goal and what your timeline and budget and outcomes, like what are the political realities. And so going back to that tiered framework, there's a whole series of questions in that think and initiate phase that help you identify which types of methods are the ones for you.
All right. Thank you so much, Crystal and Grace, for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who was able to participate in this webinar. We hope you found it worthwhile and valuable. You can join us on September 26th for our next CRC webinar with Eco-America on public participation, how to authentically communicate about climate using research-tested tools. The registration link will be included in the follow-up along with the survey link that Crystal referenced. And as a reminder, the webinar recording and PowerPoint presentations will be shared via email and also posted on the CRC website. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining us today.